All right. Hello, hello. This is Amanda and
Hello, I'm Megan.
yep, and we are back with episode 2 of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. So, as promised, we are here and today we are talking about homeschool myth busting. So, we have the top 10 myths about homeschooling that are 100% untrue. So, let's jump on into it. So, number 10 on our list, we have homeschooled kids are weird. I don't know. I went to public school and there were 100% weird kids in my class. I was probably one of them. But there were kids that were much more weird than me, and there were kids that were not quite as weird as me. But there were a lot of us in public school as well. Um, but what does it matter?
Exactly. Yeah, I went to private school. I think I was the weird kid too, or one of the weird kids, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's interesting. I mean, even when you watch kind of like a campy movie about high school or something, right? There's always the lunchroom situation where it's like the goth kids here and the jock kids there and the math nerd kids here and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it's like they themselves are perpetuating their own weirdness in these kind of films, and it's got to be based on reality somehow, right? So yeah, so what is weird, I think, is a huge part of that question. um we mentioned in our first episode that we'll be doing book club as part of our podcast. And one of our second book, actually, it's not a library book. I didn't deface a library book. I swear it's been removed from circulation, but it's Normal Sucks. And it's called How to Live, Learn, and Thrive Outside the Lines by Jonathan Mooney. This will be our second book. And it's a really interesting read. This will be a reread for us, or for me, sorry. But it's really interesting because it talks about where that normalcy term comes from in great detail and goes into studies and things like that. Is it really important? Do you want to be normal if normal is a thing?
Well, I mean, right, that's it. There, like, what is normal? One could argue that no one is actually normal. Everyone has something in their personality that sets them apart or makes them different. And different, I mean, why do we automatically equate different to weird? Like it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a silly equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I've experienced some interaction with kids who are new into the world of homeschooling, who were in public school for a really long time. And one of the really interesting things is that I notice a difference between kids that have been homeschooled for a long time and kids that have been in public school for a long time in their ability to carry on impromptu conversation. And of course, this isn't all kids on one side or all kids on the other. There's always going to be kind of a mix of everything. But I was chatting one day and I was trying so hard to engage this kid about things that he's interested in and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, this is a kid who's been told to sit down and be quiet most of his life, right? And to do what he's told and to only speak when he's allowed to and all that. He hasn't been raised in that environment of freedom. And so sometimes I think the things that get our kids labeled weird is that they're super confident most of the time in adult conversation, or they're out in the world, so they have a little bit more of a worldly approach to things. And that's considered weird because it's not typical anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think there's probably a ton of truth to that, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So homeschooled kids are not weird. There are weird homeschooled kids. There are weird traditionally schooled kids. The weird ones are interesting, if you ask me, right? I mean, who wants to be
That's it.
boring?
Being normal is really like it's not for me. I wear my weird badge quite proudly. So
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So number 9, your homeschooled kid cannot go to college. Is that true? I mean, Amanda, you mentioned in episode 1 that you're an academic homeschooler. So how devastated are you going to be when your kid can't go to college because you've homeschooled him?
yeah, right. I'm not worried about that at all, right? I mean, first off, homeschool kids are significantly more likely to be taking college classes in high school than the average kid. And you obviously don't have to do it that way, but it's easy to do if your kid is there and on that path. But based on this one, I actually went and did some research on a few of these. And there's actually a Business Insider article that has a quote. So the article was called "There's a New Path to Harvard, and it's not in a classroom." And the quote says, schools such as MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and Duke actively recruit homeschoolers.
Mm-hmm.
And, this idea that like, oh, well, you were homeschooled, so you don't know anything and you can't, like, it's just not true. Like, of course, you don't have to go to college just because you were homeschooled. But a lot of times you're a proven self-starter, you know how to think outside of the box, you are really involved in your community, you may or may not have started a business. There's so many things that are like, we want that, ding, ding, ding. That's exactly what colleges and universities want.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I did some research as well in preparation for today's episode. Now, one website that I looked at is the National Home Education Research Institute. And so one of the things that, of course, I teach my kids, and I'm sure you do too, Amanda, is look at the source. So
Mhm.
clearly, the National Home Education Research Institute is going to maybe highlight or accentuate things where homeschoolers are doing amazing. So there's information on their website. It was interesting. They did cite their sources, and you can go down and dig into the studies and things like that. So that makes it a little bit more valid. But then I also found this really interesting organization out of New York called Bright Futures New York, and it said similar things that the study found homeschool graduates earn an average salary of $67,000 per year compared to the national average of $49,000. The study found that 66.7% of homeschooled students age 18 to 24 were enrolled in college compared to traditionally schooled kids, which was almost 10% lower at 57.5%. And that's not to say that college is the only path to success. There's plenty of kids who don't go to college because they have another plan. They're still figuring out what they want to do. All of that's fine. It's not to say college is the one and only way to get there. But I think a lot of times when you say homeschooled, people go, well, are they going to be able to go to college? And the answer is yes. It's all just to say that it's a myth that they cannot go to high school or that they cannot go to college.
Yeah, no, that's it, right? You don't have to go to a 4-year university. And usually when we talk about college, they're referring to a 4-year university. You don't have to go and get a 2-year degree either or to a trade school, but you can do any of those things, right? They're all available to you as a homeschool student. And in fact, when you apply to colleges and universities, you actually get to apply through a different application where for the most part, not always, but a lot of times you have less competition in that specific category that you're applying for. It actually increases your chances. I read something, one of the more Ivy League schools had admitted like 23% of the students that applied through that avenue and had only admitted, single digit percentage of students who had applied through the other avenue.
Wow. Love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I looked up, there was an education group that I found online that had the top 20 schools. And you're right, MIT's on there, Harvard, Stanford, Duke, Georgetown, University of California, UCLA, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. These are not Columbia's on there, Cornell, Brown, Dartmouth, Yale, Princeton.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, these are not University of St. Catherine that just closed here. And I know of it only because it closed like mid volleyball tournament or something, and it's made the news, right? Because it's here in our community. These are good schools. They're not pop-up shyster schools.
Yeah. Yeah, some online, there are valid online universities, but then there are definitely some that are not as valid. And
Yeah.
it's not those are not the schools that we're talking about. Like you'll be rejected and shoved off to those options. So yeah, your kid can absolutely go to college, which is pretty awesome. What do we
Yeah.
have at
And
number 8, Amanda? Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
no, I was actually going to say that totally flows into number 8, which is there's this myth that your child needs to get a GED. If your child wants to get a GED, if that's the route they would like to go, then by all means, go that route. That's part of homeschooling, right? You get to make these decisions, but they do not have to get a GED. One of your kids is completely finished with high school, right? And taking college
Correct.
classes. Did he get a GED?
He did not get a GED, but okay, so episode 1 was Student Spotlight. We have a different segment for today, but can I mom brag for a quick second as long as we're on it?
Absolutely. Yes.
We got an envelope today from the school in the mail, and I thought it was the bill for the summer semester tuition. So I opened it, and it was his dean's list letter. I was like, oh my goodness, his first semester. But yes, no, he did not get a GED. He's going to community college first. He's only 16, so he's not ready to go take off and live at a 4-year university yet. There are people who do that, but neither he or I are ready for that step. And he's loving the community college that's 20 minutes from the house. So he didn't have to take the SAT. He didn't have to take the ACT. He needed his transcript to get in. He needed a diploma. It was really smooth sailing. It was pretty easy. It does make sense though. So my next kiddo down, 15, has 4 top schools picked out already for their college search. It makes sense to start asking those questions early and asking what they're looking for. What are the entry requirements? What are they looking for in a transcript? You don't want to get to the very end and realize that they needed 4 credits of computer language to get into some super specific program. So it does make sense to start asking those questions early, but everybody is open and willing to give you the information. If it's not online, you can call. It's a pretty easy process, but I've never heard of anybody who needs a GED to get into college or to
Yeah,
adult from
that's
homeschooling.
it. Right. To be able to prove that you got through. Like, it's not a thing. It's a thing that people like to say is a thing. It's
Right.
not a thing.
Yeah. Any roadblock that people can throw up, knowing nothing about homeschooling and just throw things out there like it's a thing. It's not a thing at all. You do not need to get a GED. Again, if your kiddo wants one, if it suits their path or their plan, great, go for it. But it is not a necessity. You can graduate with a transcript and a diploma, just like a kid who goes to public school, private school, any other educational avenue as well. So yeah, not a thing. Number 7, you need a classroom at home. Do you have a formal classroom at home, Amanda?
In my 2-bedroom condo, no, I do not. We have a very small desk, which is actually an IKEA side table or end table that just holds his stuff. And it's it's tucked into the corner of our living room. And he will sit there for like video classes when he's doing an online class of some sort. But he doesn't do hardly any other work, even at that spot, right? He's on the couch, he's on the floor, he's in the bedroom, he's in the car, he's on the airplane, he's in the hotel room. No, we have no classroom.
No. And I think, so it goes back to what kind of homeschooler are you to an extent, but even still, I have no formal classroom, which makes sense. We're super loosey-goosey homeschoolers. If I all of a sudden broke out and told you that I had a 10-foot by 10-foot whiteboard, I think you'd fall off your chair, Amanda, right? You'd be like, oh no, we have desks. But you are an academic homeschooler, and even you don't have a formal classroom. Some people really feel that they need one and want one.
Yeah.
But we talked yesterday about the first 5 things that you should do in order to homeschool or to prepare to homeschool. You'll notice building a classroom was not on there. Putting the little strips of alphabet border around your room or, calendar pockets and stuff like that. Our goal, typically speaking, as homeschoolers, isn't to mimic public school or a traditional classroom. If we wanted that, we could send them there. So it doesn't typically make sense to do that. There's plenty of people who build out these really Pinterest perfect classrooms and then never use them, right? The kids are at the kitchen table, the kids are in the car, the kids are on the back patio because it's a sunny day. They're all over the place. And that's beauty. It's the beautiful freedom that we have as homeschoolers to be able to kind of bop around and be where you're comfortable in that moment. So yeah, you do not need a classroom.
Nope, not necessary. And you
Odds
don't
are
really
good you
need
won't
any
use it.
special. Yeah, that's right. And you don't need any really special equipment, right? You may randomly need something. We're working on a research paper right now, so I have a small poster of how to cite your sources for different things taped up on the wall. I printed it off online. I taped it on the wall. Occasionally you'll need things, but you don't have to recreate a classroom in your home. You're not doing school at home. You're homeschooling, and those are 2 different things.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of people who organize their entire homeschool on one of those little rolling craft carts from Michael's or IKEA or whatever, and they've just got all their stuff in there. And then if you're working in the living room, you're working at the kitchen table, you just put your wheelie cart there and you're good to go. Because the reality is you don't need all that much stuff. Even if you're homeschooling multiple grades, multiple children, it's pretty flexible. So you do not need a classroom. If that's something that's holding you back from homeschooling, thinking, where would I set all this up? There isn't all this to set up. It's all good.
Yeah.
Your little end table from IKEA will work just fine.
Now, granted, I do have a giant IKEA bookcase full of stuff as well. I could not make it work on just one of those little rolling carts.
Well, then bookshelves are a necessity in the homeschool world for many people. So yes, I do understand the need to have a giant book collection. We are big library goers, as most homeschoolers are, and I'm sure you are as well. So we actually don't own a ton of books. But I also mentioned in our first episode that we've moved 3 times in 5 years for my husband's job, and we're very fortunate that the company comes and helps us move and all that kind of stuff. But um, still moving hundreds of pounds of books all over the country all the time is a little challenging. So we buy the books that are like the super duper special ones that we want to be able to mark up and or read 100 times and not have to wait to get to the top of the queue in the library for. So our bookshelves aren't quite as stocked as many traditional homeschoolers are, or many typical homeschoolers, but I do understand the need for a solid book housing system.
Yes, for sure. All right. So number 6, you must have a teaching degree or teaching experience.
No. Do you have a teaching degree?
I do not have a teaching degree. I was a substitute teacher. I will say that at one point in one of my many lives. But I had no experience. I had no qualifications, and they still put me in a classroom to teach kids. So I feel much more qualified to teach my own child, who I actually know what he needs and how to find the resources that I need to make that work.
I don't recall if I told you this, but when you said substitute teaching, it made me think of this. I was at my boys play a lot of card games. They play Pokemon, they play Yu-Gi-Oh, they play One Piece. They if it's a card game, they're there. Now my oldest drives, so I don't spend as much time sitting at card stores waiting for them to finish. But before I would sit and read a book or work on some work projects or something. And I was listening to this group of people playing Dungeons and Dragons at another table a little ways over. And there was a guy sitting there, and he works at Moe's, which if you don't have a Moe's near you, it's like Chipotle or one of the other taco places. It's a big chain, and you can go and you can get burritos and things like that. And he worked at Moe's, but substitute teaching was his side hustle. And if he got a call to substitute teach, he would call out from Moe's that day and then go teach instead, and had zero qualifications. And more power to you. Have an awesome day. I hope the kids have fun. The whole thing doesn't bother me. But it's funny because sometimes when I talk to parents who feel insecure about teaching their kids, I'm thinking, really, even to be a permanent teacher in the school system now, most of the time you don't need to do. I get mass emails saying no degree required, no experience necessary, mass job hiring fair. So most teachers in school don't even need that anymore because they're having such difficulty staffing schools. But yeah, you do not need to have I don't have a teaching degree. I have a degree. I did work in training in the corporate world for a really long time in adult education, but none of it is required. I did have to submit my diploma. Have you ever had to do that? And do you have to do that in California?
Not through the charter system that we do. I would guess that would be you might have to do that if you're actually filing as a private school here,
Independent.
which is independent.
Yeah.
We're not doing that yet. We will probably do it later. But at this point I haven't had to.
Yeah. In North Carolina, it was a requirement to set up our homeschool. I needed to submit either my high school diploma or my college diploma, or I suppose a GED would have sufficed as well, but I don't recall looking into it that deeply. So I sent them a copy of my diploma. They didn't care what it was in. I just needed to have something to show that I had completed high school at a minimum, and or the equivalent of through a GED, I would assume. And that was it. So you are more than equipped. The interesting thing, I think, when we have conversations with parents, sometimes who are new to homeschooling, and there's this thought process that you have to be a trained teacher to teach your kids anything between the ages of 5 and 18. And you have to have curriculum to teach your kids anything between the ages of 5 and 18. And I say to parents all the time, what did you teach your kid before they went to school? Your child showed up to school knowing how to dress themselves, knowing how to go to the bathroom, knowing how to feed themselves, knowing how to play with friends at the park, take turns, ride a scooter, color pages, do coloring, do puzzles, help in the garden, whatever there was. All of that you taught all of that. You taught it without curriculum, and you taught it without a teaching degree. You can continue to teach your kids all sorts of things with or without curriculum, but you are qualified to teach your kids. You've been teaching them since the moment they were born.
It's true. And if you are still uncomfortable with it, you can be like us. And I outsource so much, right? Like Yes, there are things that I could teach my kid and I could get curriculum and teach him, but I also I use science teachers. I find things that are interesting. I use math teachers to kind of do the next step or go deeper, right? Like there you have so many resources at your fingertips that if you don't know everything, it's okay, you don't have to. And when they get to high school, if you want to put them in community college classes or you want to put them in AP classes, all of those things are available to homeschoolers. You don't have to be an AP government teacher to be able to graduate your student with credit in an AP government class. Like it's out there, it's available. You don't have to do it all on your own.
Hmm. Yeah, I've outsourced a ton of stuff as well, and from a different homeschooling perspective, but outsourcing is a beautiful thing. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, it costs a fortune to homeschool. Can it cost a fortune? Sure, it could. I mean, anything could, right? You could go
Mhm.
on a vacation, you could go on a camping trip that costs you $150 for the weekend, or you could go on a super yacht, right? So it's like anything else, there's going to be a huge range of things. Statistically, I found online that the average homeschool family spends between $600 and $900 a year homeschooling. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't have a spare $600 to toss into homeschooling to start this, first of all, you don't have to spend it all at once. Second of all, that's an average. So that means there's plenty of people who are spending far less than that. And then if you think about all the things that you spend money on at the public school system, right? The color run, the popcorn sales, I'm contributing snacks for field day. They would send home a thing at the holidays saying the PTA was collecting $10 for each specials teacher. Do they deserve it? Absolutely. I'm not saying they don't deserve a holiday gift. They deserve the world. But you're spending a lot of money incrementally all the time in the school system. The book fair, right? The book fair was always the one. So
Yeah.
you're spending money anyway. But yeah, do you have to spend that much, Amanda? What do you think?
No, you don't have to. And I was going to just piggyback on what you were saying. These days, many, not all, but many public schools will straight up tell you this is how much you're expected to donate this year. The school that we were enrolled in on their website, it said each student is expected to fundraise or donate. I think it was $692. It was some kind of random number, but that, they're like, and we have some friends here who live in a very well to do district, and every year their public school hits them up for a $10,000 donation to help cover the cost of their different programs and the things that they need. Public school is not, it's supposed to be free. It should be free, right? That's what our tax money goes towards. It is not. The vast majority of the time, there are very real costs. And so, yeah, it can be affordable. It can be much more affordable to homeschool if you want to. I'm I will admit I spend quite a lot of money, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? And they're great options and resources, right? If you don't know where to get started, Khan Academy, it's solid, right? It's a solid curriculum. It's all online. It's free. Many universities have free open source classes that you can just take in whatever you're interested in. There are videos and documentaries and there's so much out there and available, and it's free. And then that's not even talking about what's going on at your local library. There's so many interesting programs and books, and one of our libraries actually has an entire homeschool unit. They opened a room, it's for homeschoolers. It has games and unit plans, unit studies, and all kinds of things that you can do it there, you can check it out and take it home and work on it. Like, you're not paying a dime for that.
Okay. So you've blown my mind on so many levels with everything you've just said, between public schools flat out telling people that they need to pay money. I was just constantly getting hit up for money when my kids were in school. But I said that my time in public school felt like I was on some weird episode of The Amazing Race, because it was like my kids would come home and be like, I need 12 quart-sized Ziploc bags by tomorrow, but they have to be the ones with the little zipper sliders. Okay, Mom, I need 6 red apples and 6 green apples on Thursday. I need 17 paper plates. I'm like, what the heck are you doing at school? Like, I mean, I'm happy to contribute, but oh my goodness, what is happening here, right? And so when people say, like, how do you find the time to homeschool? Like, because I'm not on The Amazing Race anymore. I mean, it was just, right? So I did not know that, like, that was my experience, was I was constantly contributing, but in kind of this oddball fashion. I didn't know that they just straight up ask for money. That's bananas. And your library sounds like a dream. We have a new library. We moved to Charleston area about a year and a half ago, and our library, the librarians are lovely and it's nice enough, but it's not the most amazing library we've ever lived near. But we have a new one opening next month. It's a little bit further away, but I can't wait to see it because your library sounds like it's amazing. But yeah, you can homeschool. I mean, there are people homeschooling for free with a library card.
Yeah.
It is 100% doable. Are there people who spend thousands of dollars a year on homeschooling? Yeah. I will be honest, like you said, you spend a lot. I have no idea what we spend on homeschooling. Somebody asked me for information today about somebody that my son takes math class with, and they said, what are his rates like? And I said, I don't know. It just auto bills every month, and I try not to look. I just pay the statement. I just pay it. Exactly. He's been with him for 2 years, so I'm not paying attention. It's just happening, right? So I'm like, is it a lot? Yeah, it's a lot, but like, he's in a great place and it's working really well. So I'm leaving it alone, and I'd rather cut something someplace else so that he can do that. So we're making it happen. But yeah, so do some people spend a fortune? Yeah, but you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. Yeah, I love it. So we touched on, I do this a lot when I have a list of things I want to get through, but we got ahead of ourselves, Amanda. Number 4, our myth is that parents have to do all the teaching and know all the things. Do you know all the things? I know everything. I'm kidding.
Yes, I am all knowing. Just ask my child. I know how to Google and I know how to ask Alexa. We do a lot of, you should ask Alexa that. I do not know all the things.
No, I don't. Anyone who does tell you they know all the things is dangerous, first of all.
Yeah.
Those are the scariest people to ever come across. So outsourcing is gold. Outsourcing is amazing. Co-ops are amazing. Tutors are amazing. Do you need to know organic chemistry to homeschool high school? No, I don't know organic chemistry. I don't know how I passed it when I was in high school, let alone trying to teach it 20 something years later. So absolutely not. You don't have to teach anything you don't want to. It could even be that you feel comfortable teaching it, but it's just not flowing really well between you and your kiddo, right? Like your communication isn't jiving and you're thinking, this would be so much less friction if someone else just did this. Give it up then.
Yes, this is so true. For us, that was with ELA, English Language Arts, right? I love reading. I read all the time. My kid loves reading. We check out hundreds of books a year. He reads at least 500 books a year. We read a ton, right? And I thought it was going to be great. And I bought all of these great lesson plans and I had all of these wonderful ideas and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And oh my God, we butted heads so much. It was so bad. Like, he didn't understand what I was asking him. I didn't understand why he couldn't figure out the answer to a really simple question. It was ugly, right? It was ugly. And that was the very first time that I turned to OutSchool, which it's one of the many online resources that we use. But I was just like, I need a novel study and it's got to be something he's going to enjoy and it's got to be someone else teaching it. Because we can't do Charlotte's Web again. That was ugly.
Most people find Charlotte's Web fairly traumatic, but for you, it was an entirely different reason.
For a different reason, it was horrible.
Oh my goodness. I love it. Well, you mentioned OutSchool. And so I actually, before we do our top 3 homeschool myths that are completely untrue, wanted to take a moment to do an ad break for our premier sponsor. We want to thank our sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. Hub of Curiosity believes that learning begins with interest, and they offer a wide variety of classes on OutSchool to enrich your homeschooling journey. They also have virtual secular co-ops for middle schoolers and high schoolers. You can find a link to their class offerings in our Instagram bio or in our YouTube descriptions on our podcast episodes. And we've also got a coupon code. It's OFCURE115, OFCUR 115 for $15 off any class of Hub at Hub of Curiosity. Now, back to our top 3, but I will say, Amanda, before we do those top 3, a secular co-op, not a thing where I live. Doesn't exist. I know you're in California, you probably have better luck, but to try and find a secular co-op, it doesn't exist. So turning virtual, I love that that exists.
Yeah,
Pretty
for
awesome.
sure. I'm interested in how that works, right? I'll be the first to admit we haven't done a co-op because all of the co-ops around me require that I help teach, and I'm not about that. Like that's not my jam. So I don't see how I would be helping teach on a virtual co-op. So I'm pretty interested in knowing more about that. So that'll be
From what I've seen, it's done by educators. So it's different than the parents coming together type of co-op, which is what we've had co-op different experiences. We had one in Florida that was super academic, and my kids just recoiled because it literally involved sitting there filling out workbooks at a desk in a church classroom, right? And my kids were like, blah. But we had a co-op in North Carolina that was beautiful, and it was just this beautiful blend of parents coming together. I did teach because our co-op was huge, hundreds of kids, and there was a ranking system for enrollment, and if you taught classes, you were in the first tier of enrollment. And so the only way I was getting 3 kids all the classes that they wanted at co-op was if I taught, and so I did. But I loved it. I enjoyed it. It was work. And every Thursday before co-op, I'd say, why do I take this stuff on? I'm so busy. And but then when I actually did it, I would enjoy it. So it worked really well. But and so in this scenario, from what I've seen, it's professional educators who are teaching, who are working in their field, right? If you're taking a filmmaking class, it's from a professional filmmaker and things like that. So it will be a little bit different since it's virtual, but awesome that it exists for kids whose parents work, kids who live in a rural area, kids who can't find a secular co-op who are looking for one, and a myriad of other inclusive for, I mean, how many times do we hear about neurodivergent kids not fitting in at co-op or just flat out not being welcomed at co-ops? And so it's nice that there's an inclusive secular option that exists for everyone all around the world, which is pretty cool. So back to our top 3. I'm loving it. Number 3, you must follow along with the path that the public school kids are on. I get asked all the time, does this happen to you? They go, well, so does the city or the state or whoever, do they send you your plans? Do they send you everything that you need to know? No. No, if they did, I would look at them sideways. Yeah.
Yeah, right? No. I mean, as an unschooler, for sure. For us, as more academic homeschoolers, I do actually look at the state standards and make sure that we have covered them in our own way, so it's not necessarily the way that it would be done in public school. But we don't have to, right? And we get to do it the way we want. So we've been doing California history this whole year, and we're going to wrap up our year of California history by taking a field trip to Sacramento and touring the state capitol and doing that kind of stuff. And I was just talking to a friend here who their kid is in public school, and I'm saying, where I grew up, you did that every year. The kids all went on a field trip, and every kid got to take a field trip to the state capitol and have a tour. I haven't heard anything about that happening here. She was like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. I'm like,
it's not a thing here.
Like, yeah, no. And so, I mean, we're gonna make that happen, and he's really excited to actually learn that way, right? Not just looking at pictures in a book or whatever. So I mean, you get to do it your way, whether you're like, yeah, I don't need that. Here in California, there's this thing called the I can statements. It's a real big thing. And a lot of the charter schools that allow homeschooling through the public system provide these I can statements, and they're kind of aligned with the state curriculum. But it's a more palatable way of saying, I can add to 10. I can identify all 50 state capitals. But different ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. So every state will have their guidelines as far as what you need to accomplish. It depends on where you live. A lot of times it just says you need complete instruction in A, B, C, and D. And there's no definition of what complete instruction is. There's It just depends on where you live. And so, but no, typically speaking, the public school system is not sending you an agenda, textbooks, lesson plans or anything like that. You are free and you do not have to do those things. If you want to, you can. But it goes back to what we were talking about yesterday as well with determining your why. Why are you doing that? If it correlates to your why, rock on, have a great time. If it doesn't correlate to your why and you're doing it because you're not sure what else to do or because you're scared to not do it, like you might be dropping the ball or screwing something up, then it's time to kind of reevaluate what your plans are and how you can align with your why and your ultimate goals.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. If it doesn't fit with your why, you really need to consider why in the world you're doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so number 2, homeschool kids won't be prepared for the real world. Do you never take your kids out to the real world? Like they're
once a couple of years ago. Yeah. We went to the state capitol. No, I'm kidding.
We did our state capitol pilgrimage and that was it.
That's it. They're done. We're checking off the list, right? My kids live in the real world. They're in the real world all the time. They've traveled, they've seen the world. I think one of the things that my kids have that I'm proud of as they've turning into young adults is they have what I like to call, they have a good sketchy meter.
Mhm.
So they have been in the world enough to know when they're uncomfortable and when something doesn't feel right, and to be able to remove themselves or make a plan or talk to an adult or something like that, because they've been on the subway at midnight and they've been, here, there, and everywhere. We got off a bus one time in Yosemite National Park. And there was a guy on the bus. He wasn't violent. He wasn't dangerous, but he was definitely behaving atypically. And my little guy, he was probably 7 at the time. We got off the bus and he goes, "Was that man drunk or high?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so. I think something along those lines." And we had a whole chat about it, right? But they've lived in the world. They're very experienced in the world. And kids who are in a classroom all day, are they prepared for the real world? They've spent 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day in a classroom. Then some of them go to aftercare. If they're not in aftercare, they're home doing homework, or they rush right to sports and then go home and do homework. Where is their real world time?
No, totally. I mean, I think like for us, I just got the email earlier this week that my kiddo qualified for the Bronze Award for the presidential, what is it called? Presidential Service Award. No, there's another S in there somewhere, but basically it's a volunteer service award that's given by the president instead of federal national level. And so in early June, he'll go get his certificate and some kind of a medal. He really wanted an actual medal. He didn't want just the like good job for volunteering. But it does mean that he had to volunteer, I think he logged around 40 hours. But, we volunteered at Feeding San Diego. We did beach cleanups. We went out and actually did some feeding, handing out food to unsheltered folks. And it's that thing. He's out in the real world. He's meeting people. He's having conversations far more than a lot of other kids, and because we can do it. We can go volunteer on a Monday afternoon at 2:00. He's not in school. We can go volunteer. And there's 15 other adults and they're always like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm volunteering for my service project." He can talk to them. He can answer them. He doesn't go like, "Oh gosh, an adult has spoken to me and I don't know what to do about that." Yeah, he's prepared for the real world, and he's getting more and more prepared every day.
Yeah, absolutely. They're out in the world all the time. So yeah, I completely that one's just bananas to me when I hear that one. I mean, we see homeschooled kids sitting in a coffee shop doing homework or taking an online class or something like that, and they're all out there living their best lives, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, we do let them out of the house. So I think that was one of the big frustrations during COVID, when people were all stuck at home and they were thinking, this is miserable. Homeschooling's terrible. And I'm like, do you think we spend this much time at home? It's such a terrible name for what we do because people think that our kids are just locked away in this room doing workbooks all day long and they never leave the house. And it couldn't be further from the truth. It's so silly.
Yeah, that's true. And our book,
Makes
our book club book will talk about that some.
Yeah, it's so true. The interesting thing, one of the books that we read in our book club previously, maybe we'll toss it into the podcast at some point for a book club book. We read, what was the name of that book? It had yellow and white stripes on the front of it. I think it was called Raising Good Adults or Raising
maybe good adults or good humans.
something about that.
Yeah.
It was something about adults. And the person who wrote it was a dean or an advisor at Stanford. And the stories that she told about kids who showed up to Stanford who were so ill-equipped to deal with life in the real world was mind-boggling. It was absolutely mind-boggling to sit there and read the book. I took a lot out of the book besides that. There were some useful, actionable things in there, but I just could not believe the world that it's in. But if you think about it, these kids are showing up to school roughly mid-August, end of August for their freshman year of college. 2 to 3 months prior to that, they were still asking permission to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Right. That's an awfully big leap to go from, I am not allowed to walk out of this room when I have to pee, to being completely on my own on a college campus and expecting to navigate semi-adult life and do it well. And so they're really not prepared to make that jump. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's true. It is a huge leap.
Yeah. So dare I use a sound effect, Amanda, for our drum roll for our number one? Let's see if it. Let's go for it.
It did work.
We needed a cymbal or something at the end, like that. Homeschooled kids are unsocialized.
So
but what about socialization? Every time. But what about socialization?
I know.
Stop it. Just stop. Right?
Just because you get the best socialization being in a classroom where you're constantly told to be quiet, sit down, and stop talking to your neighbor. Right?
Exactly. And then if you don't do that, you're going to lose recess. So no playtime. Right.
And then you can go sit in the office. Right. You can go sit in the office and quietly stare at the adults.
Exactly. But don't talk there either. And then we'll give you about a half an hour to eat lunch, maybe. I don't even know what lunch break looks like. Anymore. That might be generous. Half an hour to eat lunch. So that includes walking to the cafeteria, standing in line to get your food, cleaning up your tray, and inhaling your food. How much time are you socializing in that time period? I'm going to go with not at all. So, and if you did, it was at the expense of fueling your body for the rest of your day because there wasn't any time for it. Yeah, I don't exactly think that they're getting the greatest social life there. What do you think?
No, yeah. I was actually thinking about this. And I mean, I have a younger kid, so we still, it's kind of silly to call them play dates, right? But we schedule time to get together with friends. And at least once a week, he has 2 to 3 hours of just one-on-one or maybe a little bit more friend time where they're just hanging out and talking and doing things or imagining or climbing things or, I mean, I don't think that there are that many kids in public school who have a 2 or 3 hour block of time Monday through Friday to hang out with a friend and talk about things and share and interact, right? I mean, by the time you get home, you got to do your homework, you got to have dinner, you got to take a shower, maybe read if you're lucky. There's probably a sporting practice in there if your kids pass kindergarten. And then, heaven forbid you've got 3 or 4 kids, like you've got to juggle that much more. Like they're not having chunks of time like that. And it's hard to schedule that on the weekend because you have all the family stuff that you have to take care of on the weekend, right? Like
and birthday parties on the weekend, right? And so I have 3 kids and they would get invited to these birthday parties that would cost a fortune when we still lived in Florida. So siblings weren't invited. which I get because it cost a fortune. But now that means I didn't see my kids all week because they were in school and I was still working at the time, full time out of the house. I still work, but in a different setup. So I see my kids more. And so we'd get invited. And so my husband would take one kid to one birthday party. I'd take another kid to another birthday party. One would get dropped off at my mom's house. And it was just, and it was like living in a hamster wheel. It was
Mhm.
bananas. The thing that I disliked about the concept of socialization when my kids went to public school. So we lived in a town in Florida, in South Florida, that had 6 elementary schools in it. So, and it wasn't a huge town, geographically speaking. So my kids were really only going to school with the kids who lived right around us in
Mhm.
this little pocket here. And there were 1,600 kids in their elementary school, which is just been, it was like herding cattle all day long. That's all they did. Um, but if all those kids are coming from our neighborhood or the neighborhood across or right there, how diverse is that? How socially diverse is this? Everybody was in the same socioeconomic bracket. Everybody was culturally very similar. And so it just wasn't working. I mean, they had virtually no diversity whatsoever. In the world of homeschooling, you get all sorts of cool cats from all over the place and they all come together. And so you do end up with a little bit more diversity in your friend pool as well, which is really nice.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. For us, our zoned public school, well, actually, let me back up. So my kiddo identifies as Asian. He's actually multiracial, but he looks Asian. He identifies as Asian. And our zoned school has less than 1% Asian students in it. And so if I send him to a school that has hundreds of students and less than 1% is Asian, the chances of him being the only Asian kid, and definitely the only Asian kid in his grade, that's really high. And now he's even more the other. Like, how hard is that, right? It is, to your point, when we do drop off classes and he does a lot of camps. He really likes spring break camp when all the other public school kids are on spring break. He's like, oh, what spring break camp am I going to do? I'm going to go hang out with them, like, okay, fine. But it's always so diverse, right? And that's that matters a lot to me. We live in you know a city, and it's an expensive city with a high cost of living. It's really easy to never see much diversity or to never understand that the world is not the little bubble that we live in.
Hmm.
And homeschooling has truly allowed us to really pull from a much bigger, much more diverse group of people.
Hmm. The other thing that I think of when I think about socialization is if I got put in a room with 15 other women who were 42 years old and lived in my town, do you think I'm going to be instant best friends with these 15 other women just because we all live in the same town and we're all 42 years old? There's
You're not?
absolutely no, right, exactly. See, I'm weird, right? Back to number 10 on the list. I'm weird. The thought that that is socialization. There are 12
Mhm.
kids, they live in your neighborhood, they're the same age as you. Socialization, boom, go, check it off the list. We've done it,
Yep,
right?
did it.
It just doesn't work that way. I mean, my 15-year-old has the wackiest interest you could possibly imagine. She could knock on every single door in this town and not find another person who had an inkling of understanding of what makes her tick. She did manage to find a best friend online, and they are friends. They've met in person a bunch of times. They met in an online class that they were taking together that was niche interest based. So she managed to find somebody who figured out what makes her tick, and he's quite similar. And so it just works out really well. The mom and I are friends now, and we've met up at different conferences, and we've traveled and to gone to different places and stuff. But just because you live in the same city and you're all 12 years old doesn't make for instant best friends. It's like just add water, socialization, done. It's a very ignorant view of socialization and how friendships are formed.
Yeah, no, it is. Really, it's a really tunnel vision way of thinking that it works. When in reality it doesn't. I mean, it's the same. You can apply it to adults in a workplace, right? Sure, you might have your work friend, but how many of the people that you have to work with do you actually do things with outside of work?
Hmm.
How many would you want to? How many would you be friends with if you hadn't been put together in the work situation, right? In that work environment. Like putting people together and being like, okay, now you're friends. Like it doesn't work.
Yeah,
And it
doesn't
doesn't
work that way.
foster, yeah, it doesn't foster an ability to actually have normal conversations and just spontaneous conversations either, right? When it's always in schooling, we talk a lot about scaffolding, right? And in public school especially, there's a lot of scaffolding. But if you can only talk when you have scaffolding, when you go out into the real world and that scaffolding is gone, you have kids who look like deer caught in the headlights, right? Like, uh, it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-mm. No, it absolutely doesn't. So these are just 10 myths about homeschooling. I'm sure we could probably do a part 2 and make 10 more of these. But the bottom line is, I the experience that I see in the homeschool world is that when you say you're going to homeschool, people who don't understand anything about homeschooling, people who met one homeschooler who was weird or it didn't work out or the kid wasn't successful or something, that is their one basis for homeschooling. And they have this magical method for planting seeds of doubt
Mhm.
into people's minds. So we talk about being the real podcast, and I would just like to say that my son's service dog has just brought a very crunchy treat over and laid it right on my rug. So I'm just throwing it out there so that if I cannot get it out in editing, you'll know what it is. So yeah, they love to throw these things out there, and it really makes people doubt their ability to do this or the ability for it to work. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. It's not based on reality. Build yourself a very supportive, lovely little homeschool community and don't go there, right?
Yeah.
I don't even engage with those people. We have an episode scheduled down the road on how to deal with naysayers, but they're not worth your time. They don't know what they're talking about. And at the end of the day, you're not raising their kids and they're sure as heck not raising yours. So their input doesn't even matter.
Yeah,
The
for
end.
sure. Hmm.
Right? The end. All right. So our spotlight theme of the day is messy moments, which Waffles, who's my son's service dog, might be providing for us on the carpet right now. I'm not really quite sure. But let's kick it off with an official segment.
Messy moments, where homeschooling mishaps become our favorite stories.
So I actually have our messy moment for the week. I was thinking back when we were planning today's show, and my now 12-year-old read this book series ages ago called Genius Files. He's read them a number of times. Has your kiddo read Genius Files,
No,
Amanda?
I haven't. Every time we meet and have one of these, I come up with more things to put on my book list, which is good, right?
Shut it down. Yeah. So it ends up it's these two kids who are on this cross country road trip, and they end up doing all these oddball stops on their cross country road trip. It's like the world's biggest ball of string and, all this kind of stuff they do. And we are big road trippers. We camp all over the country. We've done a lot of national parks, a lot of state parks. And so one time we were going to be out in California doing some national park, state park type stuff. And he said, "Oh, I read about the world's largest collection of Pez dispensers and it's in California. Can we make it happen?" And I always give my kids input on when we're traveling, what they want to include, where they might want to go. So I figure out where it is. I map it. Sure, no problem. I check the website. I know the hours. I know what to expect. I forget the name of the city that it was in now because it's been a number of years, but I made sure that I knew where I could park because we have a camper van. And if it's a city, sometimes parking can be difficult. I put in the work. I was prepared for this Pez dispenser museum. It was a really small little shop, but that's how it was built. We get there. We walk up. The anticipation, the excitement, it is all there. We have been counting down to this. And there is a cardboard sign taped to the front door that they are closed to attend a funeral. And yes, I understand that the person who is grieving and the person who has died is having a way worse day than I am at this point. But at the time, my kid was like 7 or 8 years old, and now he's crying on the sidewalk in some random street in California because he can't see Pez dispensers. It was not our finest homeschooling day, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure he's over it still. So, it
Well,
was
yeah,
messy.
and I mean, that's it, right? You went out of your way, you add this thing in because you want to bring this extra joy to your child, right? And then not only did you not bring joy, but like you got a meltdown on your hands.
Crushing
Like,
disappointment. Exactly.
oh,
So
yeah,
yeah,
and I'm sure the other kids were equally unimpressed with how it had all played out. Like, we drove how far to see some Pez dispensers that we didn't want to see in the first place, but at least we would have seen some Pez dispensers.
exactly right. It would have been better than this.
Yeah.
So it was not our finest day. It ended in tears. I don't remember, but I probably had to bribe him with an ice cream or something. I don't recall, but we made it through. We haven't been back. So maybe someday we'll be out that way. We'll have another attempt at the Pez Dispenser Museum.
Second
But
try.
exactly. Keep an eye on our Instagram stories because we love to solicit our messy moments and our student spotlights and things like that. So keep an eye, submit them. We love being able to share the good, the bad, the funny, the tearful, the all of the above when it comes to homeschooling, and paint a really accurate picture of the highs and lows of our lifestyle. Do you want to close us out today with our mantra for the week, Amanda?
I would love to. So we've got: we thrive on curiosity, embrace the chaos, and laugh in the face of doubt.
Ha ha ha. Laugh in the face of no Pez dispensers, as, as the case might be today. Yeah. So if you're having a rough day, repeat it to yourself, right? We've got this. We absolutely have this. It's not always going to be smooth, but we've got it. Tune into our
Yes.
next episode. We'll be discussing the power and the struggle in building homeschool communities. We'll be talking about building secular communities for those who are looking for it as well. Depending on where you live, that can be easier said than done. So we'll be talking about building community in our next episode. Can't wait to see you there. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.